And we're live. And with me, I have the beautiful, handsome, super smart that guy T with me here today. And we're live. And with me, that's
Thanks,
on my
Yvonne.
side. I'll edit it.
No problem. That was quite the flattering intro. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I am totally and completely sorry about that. That is so embarrassing.
No problem.
Anyway, I saw your new video and you were really angry about Black Lives Matter. You were like really I've never seen you that angry before. I mean, maybe you're a long-term fan, Seth, but I've never seen you that angry before.
Yeah, that one really got under my skin, and I even considered, whether or not I wanted to make a video about it because I knew I didn't have the patience to just write out a script and go into a detailed analysis about the issues with it and the criticism I had. I knew if I was going to make a video, it's going to be complete venting. So I was trying to consider whether or not I wanted to go down that path. But yeah, I was pissed.
Yeah, I was I think I was mostly scared that somebody might have gotten hurt. I don't know if you've seen it before, but there's a video of the exact same incidents but from a different angle, and you could see one of the protesters attacking a security guard and they like really got into it. I mean, this is like a really nasty event, that's I mean, Black Lives Matter, they just got really nasty really fast.
Yeah, I think I know the angle you were talking about, where a fight, I think either nearly or it did break out. And no, there were reports of like at least two other fights that were about to break out after everyone went towards the president's office. And yeah, like you said, Black Lives Matter in this case was extremely violent. And I mean, this is generally their tactic, so it's not surprising, but it is unfortunate that it's continuing to happen every time they show up in media or anytime they show up to a protest.
Yeah, but they weren't that bad with Hillary Clinton, and they were in. I mean, they were somewhat bad with Bernie Sanders, but it wasn't to this level. This level was just bad even for them.
Yeah, and I would say like with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, I think they like go a little bit moderate with those because they know that those people, Hillary and Bernie, will pander to them. They know that they'll be able to have a platform that nobody will really oppose them that much, and basically that their views aren't as opposed or directly opposed to the Black Lives Matter activist platform. So they're, I guess, more courteous in that sense. But even like if they show any type of opposition or resistance to any protesters, for example, when Bill Clinton went on stage, defending the super predator statement, the Black Lives Matter activists that were at the event completely lost their shit. And I think that's pretty symbolic that they really don't like being told that they're wrong. They don't like having any type of narrative that goes contrary to what they're talking about, or goes contrary to their ideology or their perspective. And I think that in terms of Bill Clinton, that was like shocking for them, and they got really upset at that. In terms of Milo, you got to think Milo's like 10 times that, so they went completely ape shit.
Yeah, but Milo did, he handled it like really well, He was like just giggling the whole entire time. And he like really knew how to, at least he tried to regain control of the room by going to where the audience is until the guy blew his whistle and just kept screaming. And I mean, it's like they didn't even try to challenge him. They didn't try to debate him on any issue. And that guy, Edward Ward, he said that they were open for communication. And it's like, really?
Exactly. Like this was obviously not some sort of intellectual protest. They weren't looking to, combat the ideas of Milo. They were just looking to combat the presence of Milo. They wanted him gone from the campus. They didn't want him to be heard at all. They didn't want any type of, voice coming from him or coming from that perspective, in terms of him or the attendees at the event. They essentially just wanted to shut him down and just basically get him out of there.
Yeah, and the worst part is, I mean, the people the college Republicans, they really spent a lot of money, just like they were fundraising, and they had to like give like $1,000 for security at the very last minute. And it's sad that how much money they tried to raise to get him there, and they ruined the events for their other classmates. Not only did they disrespect Milo, they disrespect their fellow classmates, and they ruined that for them.
Exactly, and it was incredibly unfortunate that that had to play out like that. But I would say, on some sort of bright side, that I think that even though they weren't able to get the full, service that they were promised, in terms of Milo actually speaking, because the Black Lives Matter activists, kind of, fucked that one up for them. This was, I would say, a win for free speech, or not really a win, but more so a eye opener, especially in terms of the practices of this particular university, DePaul. The reviews on Facebook, they've gone for I think 4.3 stars on Facebook to now, 1.2 or maybe even lower now. People are, opening up that, this is obviously a regressive institution, that they're, completely opposed to freedom of speech and, intellectual diversity. So I think that it's good that this was able to be revealed, that, in terms of the college's actual stance on these issues. And hopefully it'll, send message to not only the administration of this college, but also other colleges, in terms of that, if you have these type of practices, if you allow these type of crazy fucking people to take over speeches and shit, then we're not going to, return to your, university for another semester. We're not going to donate, to your institution. We're not going to, promote or condone your staff or your professors, or we're not going to give you any type of accreditation legitimacy or anything like that. And I think that's pretty beneficial and helpful in terms of this fight for free speech.
Yeah, because on Milo's Twitter, he posted that there was this woman. He is Lindsay, and she was the one who said that they needed to spend the $1,000 for security, but then she is the exact same person who told security not to do anything. And I thought that was totally fucked up. The whole, well, we want you to pay for security, but when security gets there, to just tell them no, don't do anything, to just let the protesters have their way. Because again, it's really disrespectful, not only to Milo, but to their students. And I honestly think that the students should sue the university.
I would hope so too, because I mean, like you said, this is incredibly disrespectful, and I personally wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of corruption going on in which, the person who told Milo he had to pay an extra, $800,000 for security, if they like pocketed some of that money, or, and also, like I'm not a big fan of this whole safe space argument, but in terms of this was the actual, threat to legitimate safety of students, where you had, you had, staff allowing, agitation and allowing or legitimizing or permitting actual violence, or, at least really harsh hostility that could have erupted in violence, or like we said, I think it did in terms of a fight, and they didn't do anything. So this is basically the university staff saying that, hey, we don't really care about your safety. We care more about, remaining PC and making sure that we appeal to these types of, regressive, subsets in our university. And yeah, I would hope they do sue them, or if they don't pursue with a lawsuit, at least, look into attending a different university next year and have this fucking institution go the way of Mizza.
Yeah, it's kind of like being a Republican to these college institutions. It's kind of like the equivalent to being less than human. It's kind of like they have no concern for their own students as long as they think the wrong way. It's just wrong think.
Yeah, there is essentially no other social, legitimacy on most college campuses outside of the left, outside of progressivism, not just moderate left, because classical liberalism gets shit on too. Just extreme authoritarian SJW left. If you're not aligned with that movement, if you don't subscribe to those ideas, then you're essentially not only just worthless or illegitimate in terms of these in the eyes of these professors and university staff officials, but you're also somewhat considered an enemy, I would say. And that's seen in the way that they actually treat these guest speakers, or these, like you said, the college Republicans, or people who actually go contrary or counter this SJW mindset that's infesting campuses. They're like actively trying to suppress them and actually trying to make sure that they don't have their voices heard. That's in terms of college, that's insane.
Yeah, the worst part is that it keeps happening. We see the same thing happening to Christina Hoff Sommers. Ben Shapiro went through an incident like that where he was invited, then disinvited, and then they were like barricaded, I think, and he had to leave out to secret exits because his life was threatened or something like that.
Yeah, they've done this with like Ben Shapiro. They've done this with several men's rights activists. Even places like in the damn UK are actually, or either the UK or Canada, where they actually banned Milo from speaking. It's getting pretty crazy, and you could think, how much further will it go? Before maybe universities might even start putting armed security, to prevent these types of speakers from coming, or actually saying that, hey, even if you raise money, even if you have the freedom to do so, if you as a student want to have these types of speakers come to our university, you still can't do it just because we don't approve of it. And it goes to show, the complete lack of intellectual, honesty, or intellectual, or just respect for intellectual diversity on these college campuses. And it doesn't look like it's going to get any better anytime soon. And that's not good for education. I mean, education is already pretty fucked up in this country. This is just taking it, to 1,000.
Yeah, I mean, because that college, even with the kids on the left, they're doing those kids still a disservice because those kids are not used to different opinions. I mean, a different opinion triggers them. I mean, I remember in your video you said something along the lines of who would who the fuck would let a person like you as president? And you I was thinking the same thing because people like that could bring us into an unnecessary war,
Exactly. They people always complain about, like, we need more representation of, minorities, in terms of, higher power institutions, or, like terms of, I guess, areas of privilege, or, areas of power. No one's going to elect you to be a CEO or a president if you're threatening people because they have different ideas than you. If you're, stealing microphones and trying to, shut down discussion, you know, that's not, leadership material. That's not the type of attitude that's going to be, useful or needed in any type of, really hierarchical position. No one's, you're not going to make a good CEO shutting down all, dissent or any type of, opposing ideas. That's not how these type of positions work.
Yeah, and they say things like, if you hate certain behavior, then you hate Black people because this is a white patriarchal society. However, if you're a president, you have to deal with different countries like China and whatnot. I highly doubt that different countries who wants to put up with that kind of behavior either. I would think that even with the various different countries, they would be really tired. I mean, especially with violent behavior like that. I mean, that type of behavior really could lead us to a war. I mean, and not only that, but North Korea, they probably would gladly nuke the White House. I mean, we just need to give them one excuse and then, like, bam.
And I wouldn't fucking work. I wouldn't even fucking care. You know, if we get a SJ, like a really true SJW president, then fuck it. Shut down all the missile defense systems. Let them nuke the damn White House. I don't care. We deserve it at that point. And the thing is, even if they did get into like the presidency, I don't think they would even criticize some of these other nations. I mean, they'll say, well, that's just cultural diversity. If they're stoning gays and performing genital mutilation on women and everything like that, or child marriage, that's just cultural diversity. We're not going to criticize the practices of Islam. We're not going to criticize any type of countries like North Korea, because they're people of color. We can't criticize them, otherwise we'll be seen as racist and bigoted. But those crazy Westerners who just want to share different ideas, oh yeah, those are the true terrorists. It's fucking insane.
I don't know. White SJWs and black SJWs tend to act a bit differently. Like the black ones are more hostile. Like there's a video on Gazi Costa's channel, also known as Black Hitler, and he
Mm-hmm.
gets into an argument with a Muslim. And with a Muslim, he at first tried to say, "We agree with you with Israel, and we hate them too." But because this Muslim guy wouldn't apologize to a woman after calling her a bitch, the Yehudu movement, they try to shut it down. They just started yelling and screaming. They're like, shut it down, shut it down. And the guy even called the police on them. And in the end, the Muslim guy just apologized for calling her a bitch because he just wanted them gone.
Wow, I know you're talking about Black Hitler. I'm not familiar with that video, just because I can really I can't take him seriously. I mean, I know he is serious. I know he's actually a fucking bigot like that. But he's just so cartoony and so fucking outrageous in terms of his ideas and how stupid they are. I can't really watch him with a straight face. So I tend not to watch his content like that. But yeah, like you said, black SJWs and white SJWs are completely different people, and they act very different. Black SJWs are much more aggressive. They're much more, upfront in terms of their belief. They're much more, you know, hands-on approach. They're much more physical in terms of actually making things happen. Whereas white SJWs, they talk a lot of shit. They'll be on the front line, speaking for other communities and speaking for minorities and trying to shame people through language. But when it actually comes down to it, when you're up in their face, they'll kind of back down. Whereas black HJWs, if you're like get up in their face, you might fucking have a riot on your hands.
Yes, I mean, black HW state would go around starting riots, and it really sucks. I mean, it really sucks how they could act like that. And I do remember how you said on your video, like you see this in different, black communities. I don't want to misquote you. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, like yeah, I think I know which part you're talking about, where I said the like in terms of this type of hostility and these type of situations, how they escalate exactly like it did in terms of Milo's situation, where this girl, immediately went up, immediately went to, completely irrational and aggressive behavior, immediately started, threatening and, sending like physical intimidation tactics, like pointing all up in Milo's face, getting up in his face, shouting at him in his ear, basically asking him, like, what you gonna do? Like, are you going to hit me? Like basically trying to provoke him. And this type of, this methodology happens all the time in black communities. And this is why, a lot of times this is how shit escalates. And it's not, of course, not limited only to black communities, but it is prevalent in black communities, at least from my experience. People always, it always starts up with somebody getting, too fucking emotional, somebody getting too, aggressive in terms of getting up in somebody's face. And at that point, the other party is no longer, being rational. There's no longer a sane, calm conversation to be had, because now we've moved from simple disagreement to threatening each other. And that's how shit escalates to where people begin to fight, people begin to, shoot, people begin to get jumped, people begin that's when the police get called, and police get involved, and then police violence occurs. It's a cycle that always starts with someone getting too emotional and just basically trying to be hard, trying to prove themselves in terms of not backing down to someone else, and basically trying to win through aggression rather than win through discussion.
Yes, I totally agree with you because I was born and raised in the ghetto, and that was my childhood actually. There was just so many fights. It then I just became a bit of a hermit or a recluse or whatever. I just stayed, in the house because people in the ghetto, they always want to fight you, even if you don't want to fight. You're like, no, I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight. If you do not want to fight, that's too bad for you because if you don't fight, you're just going to be a punching bag. So you kind of force
Exactly.
fights or be a punching bag because they'll just like, oh, fine, then you don't have to fight. I'm just going to hit you anyway. So if you don't fight, they're just going to hit you anyway. So you're kind of forced to fight back, even if you don't want to fight. And then in the end, it's kind of a lot like my family bought a computer and we just end up staying in the house all the time. And before we left the ghetto, I mean, it just gotten so far worse with the riots and whatnot and gunshots. I mean, there would be constant riots outside the house. There would be gunshots flying, and it just became so terrifying to live there that we just moved to a white neighborhood. And it's like, wow, this is like really nice and pleasant.
Exactly. It's like they don't give you an option to avoid, some type of fucked up situation. If they want a fucked up situation, then you have to engage. If you don't want to voluntarily engage, then they're going to force you to engage by, instigating. And yeah, like you said, it happens all the damn time in black communities. And people don't want to hear it. People don't like to hear it. They say, oh, you're always bringing down black people. You're always criticizing us. Things like that. They call you coon and all that shit. But fuck it. This is how it happens. And it's all fun and games. It's all whatever. Let's ignore it until, hey, you're the one in the issue. That's the thing. I love when fucking when white SJWs always talk about, like they always try to get on me when I mention black on black crime or black violence or hostility. They always say, oh, look at you, Uncle Tom, making all this shit. Listen, you don't have to, you know, subjugate yourself to this type of violence every day. You are not, more likely to die at the hands of someone, in your age group, more than any other, death rate of any other, demographic. I, as a young black male in an urban metropolitan city, am far more likely to die at the hands of people in my age group of my same racial demographic, than any other comparable demographic. And white SJWs, they say, well, you don't need to talk about that. You're Uncle Tom and shit like that. Listen, I'm the one who's being threatened by this situation. I'm the one who has to actually face and live up to this shit. So, you trying to, call me Uncle Tom for mentioning it or bringing awareness to it doesn't really fucking, do much justice. I really don't care how you feel about this. Because at the end of the day, I'm the one who has to deal with it.
Yeah, it's always so weird to be called a white supremacist. Like I've been called a white supremacist. I'm internalizing whiteness. You know, God Sikoso and that other girl, what's her name again? Saran. People like us are coons and whatnots, but it's kind of a lot like I mean, there's something wrong with the black community. And I'm not saying it's only the black community. The British, they have a problem with the Muslim, like Cologne, Germany, Rodham, England. Over there in Europe, the problem is the Muslims. But over here in the US, the problem is, different black neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Um, let's see. Um, uh, Is there anything else on your mind?
Um, well, let's see. The something that I have been seeing a lot, especially in terms of the aftermath of this particular video, is I guess the very response that I'm getting in terms of people, who are in agreement with me, but also the constant need to feel like I'm comparing, feel like that I'm having some sort of competition with other races in terms of these problems. Um, and it it's funny because I actually mentioned this point in my video, where actually I said, don't mention that, you know, black white people have these problems too, or Hispanics have these problems too, because whenever you talk to Black Lives Matter, it's always, in the sense of, hey, we're talking about black people here. This is a black conversation, a black space. They'll bring in other races, they'll bring in other problems or other racial demographic problems or any other ethnicities or anything like that. We're only talking about black culture here. And, hey, if you want to have that type of, isolated conversation, that's fine. But it has to go both ways. You can't only have this type of isolated conversation in terms of, black culture or black issues only when it suits your narrative, because pretty much whenever you bring up the issue that, if you bring up something that harms black people, like if you bring up, you know, black on black crime, they'll say, hey, don't bring up that. Nobody cares about that. White people do that too. What about white crime? What about comparable statistics? Once you bring up something that negatively, criticizes black actions, in terms of them being responsible, they're going to bring up all these different demographics, all these different, perspectives in terms of other races. But if you talk about, like you just say Black Lives Matter, and someone says all lives matter, or you say, blacks experience this problem of poverty, something like that, you say, why white people experience this problem too? They'll say, oh, shut up, we're not talking about white people. This isn't about white people. This is about black people. It's blatant hypocrisy in terms of actually wanting to be intellectually honest about, problems. You want to say, I want to address, only black problems when it suits my narrative, when it's comfortable. But if it gets uncomfortable, then we're going to bring in, all these other races. We're going to bring in all these other demographics to try and, lighten the burden that we have, in terms of self criticism. And I've been seeing it's funny because I actually made that point flat out clear in my video, and I still had people coming back in the comment section talking about, well, what about white people? What about white people's welfare statistics? What about white crime? What about white people, murder rate and shit like that? I'm like, you're Black Lives Matter. You're the epitome of people saying, let's only talk about one racial demographic issue. So why are you bringing the other races in this context?
Yeah, it's much more like Black Doug Lives Matter because it's kind of like you people should care if there's violence going on within their own community, but it's like they don't, but it's kind of like it's like they're protecting the thugs and the gangsters because it's kind of like if a white cop shoots a black person, there's a problem. But there should be a bigger problem if a black person shoots another black person, which happens more often. And I think another part of it is insecurity, and they're just trying to. I think it's partially cognitive dissonance where they're trying to shield off anything that takes that victimhood away from them. I think they're just trying to keep the victimhood. They want to feel like a victim, and they can't just focus on the idea that white people have problems too, and that white people aren't their enemy. And if anything, we should fix the problems within our own community. But instead, it's kind of like when you try, you're just a white supremacist. Even if you're black, you are a black white supremacist, which is weird.
Yeah, and especially in terms of like facing inner like pro- problems within our community, it's always, especially in terms of like Black Lives Matter and leftist organizations. people like that who associate, farther left, it's always, we're going to fix this problem via some sort of external entity. We're going to fix this problem, through the government. We're going to fix this problem, through hierarchical institutions, giving us affirmative action. It's never any type of, individual effort. It's never any type of, merit, based on the person, based on our community actually taking a stand and doing something right. It's always, we need help from this, external source. And I think that ties into the fact that, like you said, we want to maintain that victim narrative, because once you actually acknowledge that you have to take actions as an individual, take action upon yourself to make your situation better, then at that point you're no longer being a victim. You're actually, going, by your own means, bootstrapping your way out of a bad situation. And for some reason, whether people like Black Lives Matter think that's too hard, or whether they think that, unfair, because they think like they're entitled to something, based on the, 200-year-old, slave trade that they never experienced in their life. They feel like they're still owed something, that, the opportunity still isn't there. They still don't have the capability to, become, successful in this, whatever they want to make it out to be, white supremacist society. you know they just like maintaining that victim status. And I think it's, pretty lucrative for them, because they do ask government for help. You can always ask, higher institutions for help and handouts and things like that, especially if you play the race card. So I don't think they really have any incentive to take, individual approaches, in terms of actually bettering themselves in life. I think they actually have an incentive to do the opposite and maintain a victim status, just to keep the handouts and keep the freebies and the, the complimentary assistance rolling in.
Yeah, it reminds me of what you said in your video. You said if we lived in a white supremacist society, then how come Black Lives Matter always ask the white supremacist society for help? I mean, that's more cognitive dissonance. It also makes me think of Dinesh D'Souza. He was in an interview and he said that Black people had a very unique experience in America where white people generally have been rebellious towards the governments. With Black people, the governments helped ended slavery during the time of Lincoln, where he abolished slavery with the help of the abolitionists. And then the government also helped with ending segregation. So Black people are more used and accustomed to relying for the governments for help, whereas people from other countries, like people from Japan or Bombay or whatnot, even Jamaica, they know how to help themselves and excel in this society. They know how to basically leapfrog ahead of the African American community.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you really think about it, Black people, especially in terms of America, haven't really had any type of situation where they've had to, get themselves, out, from under the, the boot of government, in terms of opposing them, whether that be slavery. Of course, there was plenty of abolitionist movements, within, African American circles, in terms of, trying to escape the slave trade, runaways and all that. But in the end, it did boil down to government, abolishing slavery. It boiled down to, fighting with the Civil War, and government actually making that practice illegal. So hey, that's one example of, Black people, needing government to, solve the issue. And also in terms of the civil rights movement, you could say, well, they were opposing government, they were opposing racist Jim Crow laws and, government policies. But in the end, they still look to government to actually end those policies. They actually look to government. Once those policies were ended, they looked for affirmative action to make sure that those policies were banned, rather than just say, "Hey, government, let's have you not enforce this. Let's just, let us be free. Let us, do what we do. and you don't enforce racist policies rather than actually outlaw racist policies. But they actually went further in asking them to outlaw them and asking for affirmative action in terms of, anti-discrimination laws and things like that. So hey, that's another example of, black people, in terms of America asking government to, solve the problem. So, like you said, white people, they've had, a lot of other instances where they've actually opposed the government. America was founded on opposing, actually not asking the government for some sort of, referendum. We're not asking government to, make things better or to appease to their wishes, but actually, outright revolting against them, in terms of saying, hey, fuck you, government, leave me alone. We're going to take over for ourselves, individuals. Whereas black people, even now, the current Black Lives Matter movement, no one's asking for that. No one's asking, for increased liberty for black people. They're just asking for, a better government. They're asking for government to, do better by black people. They're asking for more assistance and more, affirmative, privilege in terms of government, positively reinforcing or enforcing assistance for black people, making sure that we have, less sentences for black people. I mean, some of the stuff is understandable, but a lot of it just goes to the idea of black people not taking individual steps, not looking for, individual freedoms, and actually just looking for government to assist them.
Yes, yeah, yes, I miss the old defiant American spirits. I miss how defiant we used to be, and I think that now we are too dependent on the governments. It's kind of like we are looking to the governments as a type of parents, and I'm afraid that this could lead to communism. That's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that we're flowing more and more into communism, because I mean, even with the gay community, when it comes to Obama, he said that he supported gay rights, and then the gay community looked for the Supreme Courts or whatever to make it legal in all 50 states or whatever, something like that, where it became legal, gay marriage became legal in all 50 states because of the government. And I think that people are becoming far too reliant on the government and far too handicapped, where they're handicapping themselves, basically.
Yeah, there's a growing, interest and incentive in promoting the idea of positive rights in terms of, government actually, basically like making gay marriage a right rather than, making gay marriage a freedom, making, universal education a right rather than making education a freedom for people. And it's a, some people may say, what's the difference, in terms of, having government say gay marriage is, the law of the land rather than just saying gay marriage is allowed, it shouldn't be hindered by government. It's a pretty big difference, in terms of, one is the government actively enforcing, your preferred, idea or your preferred, um, lifestyle in terms of actually enforcing it and making it mandatory on others, whereas the other is, just saying that, hey, if you want to pursue this, idea, if you want to pursue this lifestyle, you are free to do so. But, the government isn't going to have a role in, actively making sure that that is enforced, or actually actively making sure that that, sort of, the law or any type of, institutional, um, affirmative, um, you know, recognition. And I think a lot of people are, going for the former, in terms of what they really want, government to, legitimize it. They really want that, idealistic, um, you know, approval from the state. And yeah, that does lead toward, greater socialism and, even further communism. We have a lot of these Black Lives Matters activists, ironically Che Guevara shirts and, Mao t-shirts and, flying communist flags. where they really don't know that these ideologies have never really fared well for Black people, and that many of the leaders behind these ideologies, actively hated Black people. It's pretty fucking hilarious when you see a Black Lives Matter activist wearing someone's face on a T-shirt who actively called for the genocide of their race.
Yes, I think it's all about having the government act as appearance to feel legitimate. Like one of my problems with gay forcing people to bake a gay wedding cake is that one, it goes against freedom of religion, and freedom of religion was supposed to be a protected constitutional right. But not only that, but when it comes to forcing people to bake a gay wedding cake, even though they don't want to, I think it leads to a type of paranoia where people are like, this is a microaggression, that is a microaggression. You are really bigoted to me, and it's like on a subconscious level, you don't know that you're bigoted against me, but you actually are. Because when you force people to bake gay wedding cakes. And when you force people to be nice to you, you have that paranoia there of, it's like, is this really a microaggression? Like, do you really like me? Or do you like me because you have to like me? When really, if people had more freedom to do what they want, then you would know that if a person is having a gay catering service, it's because you are genuinely accepted, that they really do genuinely like you. And if a person doesn't want to sell to gays, you know that they genuinely don't like you. But when you force people all across the board to do it, then you're like, well, this is some microaggression. When really, I think when they say microaggression, I think they mean passive aggressive hostility, where a person is like really nice, but their true feelings is that they don't really like you. But if you're going to force somebody to be nice to you or lose their job, then of course people who don't accept you would have to pretend to accept you or get fired.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's pretty much enforcing microaggressions. Making that mandatory standard. It's the irony of SJWs. Has no limits. It can go to the fucking moon and back. Um, but yeah, like you said, in terms of freedom of religion and freedom of association, you know, actively forcing people to accept your worldview or to associate with you even if they don't want to. You may think that, hey, that's going to help. That's going to help cure the world of bigotry. It's going to help make everyone more tolerant. No, it doesn't. It just makes people resent you a bit more, and it makes people actively oppose any type of lifestyle you may want to lead, and actively oppose your rights, and more, so if you want, like, if you force someone to make a gay wedding cake, that's not going to make them, more appreciative or more tolerant of, homosexuality. It's going to make them think or associate homosexuality with totalitarianism and, force and aggression, which is not a good thing to be associated with anything, especially if you're trying to convert a bigot, in terms of them being against any type of human rights or any type of particular lifestyle or religion or whatever sexuality. um yeah, forcing them to accept you without their consent via the state, especially in terms of conservative towns and right leaning states and people who lean right in terms of their politics. That is not a good move. It's not a smart strategy. But I don't expect SJWs or leftists to be the ones who are going to be the purveyors of smart strategy. So this is kind of predictable, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Like a person could have gay friends that could somewhat like a gay people, but they probably don't want to bake a gay wedding cake because it goes against their religion, and they probably are afraid that gay people are going to go to hell. They probably just like, oh, I like gays, it's just it goes against my religion, so I just would prefer not to make a gay wedding cake. But when you force them to do it via the government, it's kind of like telling the teacher on them or telling their parents or them, like, Mrs. Jones, this is what this person did. You're basically tattling on them. And it's going to make that person resent you and hate you. And it's going to raise more problems. And it's going to cause more bigotry. And because you are, you know that this person doesn't like you, and they have to be nice and pretend to be nice, and different people have to pretend to be nice to you, then it's kind of a lot like this is where SJWs causes their own problems. This is where it's kind of like you're forcing people to pretend to like you even when they don't, instead of just so, because it's like, come on, there must be so many different bakers out there. I'm pretty sure that's not the only baker in town. I mean, come on. America is like the fattest country in the world. I'm pretty sure that they can find a different baker. It's just a power play to me. It's just going on a power trip and then hating the consequences of not knowing who genuinely likes you and who doesn't.
Exactly, and even if there is another baker in town, too fucking bad. If this establishment doesn't want to serve you, you have no right to force them to serve you. You have no entitlement to their service. If you really want a cake that bad, either take the extra 45 minutes to drive to the next town over and get a cake there, or go on YouTube and go to Walmart and get some supplies and make your own damn wedding cake. I mean, granted, I'm not going to support any establishment that's going to deny someone service based on those type of arbitrary things like that, certain especially such things as trivial such as sexuality. But if they choose to do so, that is their choice, and you shouldn't be pursuing government action to force them to satisfy your consumer demands against their will. And I think it just goes back to the whole point of them not actively looking to solve things through discussion, and actually looking to solve things through persuasion. They just actually want to take the easy route, force their ideas to be accepted, whether that be to ask government to force and mandate that their sexuality be accepted by everyone, or whether it's to force and mandate that their movement be accepted on college campuses without any type of contrary opinion or viewpoint. It just goes, it's all one big circle. It always comes back to this same center theme of authoritarianism.
Yes, and you can't force anybody to accept you. I mean, if a person is forced to bake a gay wedding cake, by law, I mean, they could always spit in the cake. They could always pick their nose and put their boogers in the cake. And you probably are forcing yourself in a position where you really are better off baking your own cake. And baking a cake really isn't all that hard.
Exactly. And if they want to put themselves in that situation, I mean, I wish them luck. I hope they have a reasonable baker who wouldn't take that type of approach. But if they do, hey, they brought that on themselves.
Or they could use the extra money to support an anti-LGBT cause. So it's kind of like it's kind of like, why would I want to go? It's kind of like, for example, where I live, there is a place somewhere nearby called the Plantation. And there's not a single black person that wants to eat at the Plantation. The name is just kind of like, no way. And it's kind of like, we know that a bunch of racists, the biggest, like to eat there. And that's fine by me. I would never support such a place. And back when I was in school, there were many classmates that would never support such a place. We all hoped that it would just naturally go out of business. But it's kind of like, if I did try to eat there and force them to serve me, they could always give the extra money to the KKK. And it's kind of like, even if they are nice to me, that doesn't mean they can't give the KKK a generous donation. So again, why on earth would you want to eat at a place that doesn't want you there?
Yeah, it's the mandated, subsidization of bigoted establishments. It's it's fucking retarded. And these people don't really see the irony in making this, law, or actually taking these steps. They don't actually see that they're not helping, any type of minority groups by forcing this. They're just actively, mandating that people put money in the pockets of covert bigots. And I don't know. I think it might be too hard to explain it to them, because I've tried before and they just don't get it. But yeah, at this point, I don't really think that they're going to. I don't really have the hope that they're capable of understanding it. But I guess being a libertarian, or at least hoping that we can expand these types of ideas, of freedom of association and individualism and respect for other people's property rights. I have to somewhat believe that we can persuade these people at least a little bit to understand why they're fucking up.
I don't know. Some feminists and SJWs listen. I mean, Sargon's name is a byword. I mean, whenever I bring up Sargon, you can see a bunch of feminist heads begin to spin. They feel it's like they're about to vomit out blood. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, they are at least aware, and apparently they do like watch. Apparently, they watch Sargon's videos, because I went to somebody gave me Sargon's Rational Wiki page, and they basically went through his videos, and they just quotes mined and distorted a bunch of things he actually said. So apparently somebody just went through Sargon's videos just to quote mine them all.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, I guess, know your enemy to, make them out to be, racist. So that's not surprising. But yeah, I'm sure some feminists are, like you said, they are reasonable. Some feminists, well, I wasn't as far as reasonable, but some of them are at least open to reason. They're open to discussion, open to opposing viewpoints, and actually rarely, but sometimes shifting their views to meet reality, or if you don't want to accept that, to just meet reason. Um, and that those are the ones that still give me hope, and those are the ones that make me do this without going crazy. But a lot of them, unfortunately, don't meet those standards. And like with the like with this Black Lives Matter chick, I just I can't have any type of calm, rational discussion with them anymore. I actually just try to, respectfully point out the issue that they're having. I just gotta completely just call them out, blunt, straight to the point. I don't care if they get offended, just I just gotta call them out in the bullshit.
Yeah, Black Lives Matter, they actually act far worse than feminists. And like, for me, from my personal experience from talking to feminists, the male feminists act far worse than the female feminists. When I talk to female feminists, many of them tend to be rather nice. I've spoken to many nice female feminists, but it's kind of like when I talk to a male feminist, that's when I get go fuck yourself, or you don't care about your rights, or internalized misogyny. They're far more aggressive than the female ones. But Black Lives Matter, they're are on a whole new different level of terrible behavior.
Yeah, and yeah, it goes back and forth. Um, Especially, like you said, in terms of, basically making you out to be the making you out to be something wrong with you, like you don't understand something, or you have some sort of internalized hatred of yourself. And you know feminists do it, SJWs do it. It's just a common trait of the regressive left. And Black Lives Matter is of course no exception.
Yeah, but I mean, I also was under the impression, like, for one guy, person who said Black Lives Matter that I was talking to, I was under the impression that they were trying to convert me because they were talking to me, for a long time. And then, even though that person did call me a racist and, like a white supremacist and, a white ally, they did seem like they were trying to change my mind and convert me and to try to get me to become one of them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess if they have hope that you can, that they, I guess they think they have reasoning skills so they can, try to persuade you, but obviously it doesn't work quite that often. And more or less, it's just kind of laughable.
Yeah, like, even the Alex Jones channel Infowars, there was this protester. I think they were a Bernie Sanders protester, and they were trying to persuade a black guy to stop, to not vote for Donald Trump. They do try to, they look at other black people. They're like, yeah, they try to persuade us. They want us to become one of us. But the problem is, they they don't see themselves objectively. They don't see themselves the way everybody else see them. Because, I mean, looking at the issue with Milo Yiannopoulos and the Paul incidents where they just went on stage, they just seem like a bunch of dictators or authoritarians. They are making a decision for everybody, regardless of what everybody else wants. I mean, it's like they are trying to create a dictatorship society. It's kind of like they shut it down against the wishes of the college Republicans. And it's not fair for them because they wasted their money. But in retrospect, they shouldn't have allowed them in. Because I remember there's this woman somewhere towards the end of the video or somewhere in the middle. Her name is Katie, and she's the black chick who has a master's in math, or trying to get her master's in math. And she said, "Well, we let you in. You were mad because we didn't let you in, so we decided to let you in, and you didn't even pay." And it's kind of like, well, that's where you went wrong. You let the protesters in, and it's kind of like they must have known what's happened with Donald Trump and how they ruined everything. They shouldn't have allowed the protesters in. They should have kept them out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's going to have a ripple effect in terms of, future events, especially conservative events, where they're just going to say, hey, no, if you have any, if we even suspect that you're going to, be disruptive, we suspect that even if you just have opposing views, we're going to keep you out, which is understandable, in terms of just actually, allowing for discussion to take place without the type of censorship, but also still doesn't, do any justice in terms of, intellectual diversity, freedom of opinion, because it's still kind of, breeding these types of echo chambers in which, there is no, there's no conversation being had because, like with the left, they're incapable of having, open discussion, and they do things like this, these type of censorship tactics. And in contrast, people have to defend themselves by actually censoring, or not really censoring, but actually preventing possible opposition from the left. So the left comes in, makes this standard to where they can no longer be trusted to actually have discourse. So now the right has to, take the same actions in actually preventing any type of discourse to be or to be attempted to come from the left. So it's kind of like a back and forth to where everyone, it doesn't do any service for intellectual diversity, doesn't do any service for, freedom of ideas or anything like that, or it just down to it does harm to every party involved one way or another.
Yes, the left, they can't be trusted to behave themselves. They they act like a bunch of dictators and they just want to shut various things down and ruin things for other people. And it's really really sad because they the college Republicans spent so much money on that event just for it to get shut down, and it does ruin discourse for everybody who wants a discourse. But they've proven that they can't be trusted. And what I think is going to happen is that they would probably make it more secretive, like for like if they want to a speaker come, for the people who pay, it would just get sent to their email address, so that's the SJWs wouldn't know about it enough to protest. It would just be a lot like, hey, Mila, come. If all those who pay, they'll just get an email, and the location would be secrets unless you have the email and know where to go, because it's just driving a rift.
Yeah, and it just goes to show there's not really many options to take in terms of finding a solution to this other than ostracizing and keeping the left out of these types of positions to where they can disrupt discussion and actually prevent the sharing of ideas until they get their act together. What Who knows when that's going to be?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, but I do think it's going to quickly backfire. The reason why I think it's quickly is because where could they go when they graduate from college? They can't even handle a different opinion. They won't be able to survive in any workplace for very long, because if you disagree with them, you're either a racist bigot or you are internalizing misogyny or internalizing white supremacy. When they graduate from college, where could they even go?
Yeah, but I used to think this, but now they're actually shifting the college culture, in terms of this safe space idea and this perpetual victim complex, and making sure that these type of colleges, higher education institutions cater to them 24/7, cater to their feelings all the time. They're actually shifting that towards the workplace, where actually they're getting companies, they're using these type of shaming tactics in terms of saying they're racist or homophobic or sexist, and actually getting companies to cater to their needs as well. So I hope that it doesn't go as far to where a lot of these companies subjugate themselves to these types of tactics and submit to these SJW demands. But I can say that I wouldn't be surprised if they gain some traction in terms of SJWs actually infiltrating these types of professional institutions and basically shifting the safe space from college to occupation to business.
Even if some businesses are trying to, you know, um, create safe spaces and whatnot, again, these people cannot handle a different opinion, and they are going to run into a different opinion sooner or later. You can't have yourself in a bubble all the time. And when they are exposed to a different opinion, they're not going to react very well. And not only that, but we are seeing some real life consequences with it, in relationships to other countries. Because I've read a Breitbart article where some guy in Japan is really mad because his video games can't be shipped to the United States because it's offensive. And not only that, but with Brexit in Russia. Russia put out an article of how it hates that they hate political correctness because it's it prevents discourse, it prevents the exchange of ideas. So this type of thinking is getting us into a little bit of trouble with different countries. And if it keeps escalating, I really don't think different countries are going to put up with us. I mean, I don't
I
think Russia has much power, but Korea, North Korea would like to nuke us. And it's kind of like some of these other countries that probably wouldn't tolerate us. They are doing better financially. Like China, they're doing much better financially. Like America is 440 billion or trillion dollars in debts. I forget the exact number. Whereas China, they're doing very well financially. And it's kind of like, do we really want to go around pissing different countries off because of our ideology? And I don't think Christianity, at least from the past 100 years, 200 years, I don't think Christianity has caused that much of a fuss. I don't think so.
Yeah, and like you said, in terms of, especially in terms of economic standing, this type of SJW culture is going to do a lot of damage. We already have this, like you said, this $19 trillion in debt, in America, and if you go forward, with all these ideas of entitlement, especially in terms of things like Bernie Sanders supporting, like universal education, universal, you know, complimentary housing and basic income and minimum wage, is basically just pandering and pandering and pandering, here and there, back and forth. It's which is going to add incredibly more debt. It's going to do it's not only damaging the social structures of society, but it's also damaging economic structures, which promote issues in the long run, way down the line, to where even if we get rid of this SJW, hive mind, wave that's infiltrated and ruining um, Western culture, even if we disband that and get it out the way, once these issues have taken place, it's going to take a long time to recover.
Yes, we it would take a very long time to recover. It's what they're doing, like what Bernie Sanders was advocating for, to just make all colleges free or whatever, using taxpayers' money, so it's not really free. It's really destructive for our economy.
Yeah, it is, and I, as someone said before, if you can't get the left, realize that biological sex exists, if we have to spend time, discussing that with, the radical left, and trying to get them to understand basic biology, and to understand that, people everyone in the world isn't racist and transphobic and misogynistic inherently. We have to deal with that right now. How do we expect to even come close to educating them, in terms of economics, and how these types of authoritarian socialist policies are doing great harm to the economic standing, the financial structures of individual Americans' lives. It's if you can't even understand the basic concept that there are two sexes, male and female, then I'd have no hope that you'll anytime soon understand the complexity of economics, and the complexity of the finances, and entrepreneurship and business, and incentives in terms of any type of foreign policy, or economic policies, or anything like that. It's almost so kind of depressing to think about it, because it's a road that we have to go down, that is going to by the time that we can get them to, be reasonable and actually understand this type of stuff, we're going to already be too far behind.
Yes, everything's racist, everything's sexist, everything is homophobic, and it needs to be pointed all out saying it's we we're falling back on science. There are people out there who think that men could get their periods. It's like, oh, if you're a man, you could get your period, and if you some women don't get their periods, and it's kind of like when it comes to trans subjects, I have no problem with trans people at all, but we shouldn't negatively impact, our education systems because what my concern is, I'm afraid that there's going to be little boys out there who think that when they turn 13 that they're going to get their periods. It's kind of like what are we doing when it comes to trans acceptance? How far are we taking it? Are we putting it to the point where it's like little boys honestly believe that they're going to get their period, where little boys are going to think that they're going to get pregnant one day? They're like, mommy, I don't want to get pregnant. I don't want to get my period. And it's kind of like if you say, well, you can't get your period, you're a boy. Oh my God, well, I'm transphobic now. I'm a bigot, and I need it to be reported to the adult police, and I need to be re educated and unlearn things.
Yeah, exactly. We all know that pregnancy is a social construct, and if someone identifies as, being able to, give birth, then you have to accept that. If you don't, then you're a bigot.
Yes, if you do not accept that men could get pregnant, then you're a bigot. So if you should ever have children, especially sons, if you ever have sons, and if you tell your son you don't have to worry about getting your period, you don't have to worry about getting pregnant, well, you're just transphobic and you're hateful and you need to unlearn your cis normative biases.
Yeah, it's going to be some fun times going forward, and I'm not looking forward to them, but I am ready. I've come to the acceptance that it's going to happen, and I am bracing myself.
Yeah, unfortunately, it seems like it's going to happen, and there's not much that we could do to stop it, but countries are facing the consequences of it, like all the rapes that are happening in Cologne, Germany, or did happen in Cologne, Germany, or the rapes that's happened in Rotterdam, England, because of the Muslims. It's kind of a lot like they may be forced to face problems, especially since Muslims want to enforce Sharia law and make that the law of the land, which would conflict with Western values. And people may just have to learn the hard way that this is not something that we should accept. But people usually don't learn things until they hit rock bottom.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that's going to be the situation we're going to be in. Well, I wouldn't say that because there's a lot of people who are waking up to it. But in terms of a lot of these SJWs, I don't think they're going to really understand, the harm that they're posing, in terms of their ideas until we get to, like a situation in Cologne, to where things are really really going to shit.
Yeah, I don't think they understand the harm that they're really causing. And by the way, your mic has been breaking up, so it's been kind of hard to understand what you're trying to say.
Oh, sorry, I think my bandwidth is taking up a little bit of extra power right now because of peak hours, and I think a lot of people are using internet in my area, so it might be slowing down a bit.
Hmm. Okay. Hmm. Well, is there any extra things that you would like to say, or should we just?
Um, Yeah, I think we could probably end it here. This was a pretty good convo, and I know I've seen you before, Danny Duchamp's channel in terms of the social justice stream. So hopefully we'll be able to meet up on one of those pretty soon as well.
Maybe, but I mean, I've never interviewed you before, and I do interviews on my channel, and I never ever had an opportunity to interview you. So maybe we could set something up.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah. So goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.
Take care, guys.